Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is where I look exclusively at films on 3D Blu-ray, not to do a movie review, but to focus almost entirely on the 3D, with just a short word at the end about the film itself, and this time I'm looking at Texas Chainsaw from 2013. This has an aspect ratio of 2.39 to 1, and it was natively filmed in 3D. A natively shot horror film is a great prospect for plenty of bold and maybe over-the-top fun 3D, so you might hope to see them really exploit the use of native stereo here and give us plenty of fantastic 3D in this film, particularly after a very nice title screen where the letters solidly break apart and tumble towards us and out of the screen. Now, obviously, when they decided to go 3D with a Texas Chainsaw film, there's one particular shot they had in mind that definitely had to be in the film, and you do get it several times. So this thing emerges out of the screen, and maybe in this shot it's done best of all, but other times it's perhaps a little bit less effective due to the angle and the lighting, but it is there, so they ticked that box. Perhaps not with quite as bold a tick as you might hope, but chainsaw pop-out shots, check. And it's not just when it's being maniacally wielded, but it's also thrown towards the camera at one point too, bursting out of the screen here in one of those ultra-brief moments of negative parallax that's only there for a few frames. And it's the same sort of thing when a barn door gets smashed open and a piece of it flies towards the camera. A very brief bit of pop-out, but it does work. One or two other things come out of the screen in an obvious way, like a knife, just a very small one, so nothing too exciting about this bit, or some fella gets his teeth knocked out and a handful of them fly out of the screen. But again, these are super brief moments, and possibly not all that thrilling when it comes to shoving stuff into our face. I thought maybe the best moment of obvious pop-out is when this pointing finger comes out towards us. It's a slow movement, so plenty of time to enjoy the 3D space that it's moving into, but more to the point, so to speak, this is a piece of narrative-related 3D, when the owner of the hand is indicating something important, so this is 3D that's actually directly connected to the storytelling. And there are one or two other moments of that in the film, like where she discovers something rather unpleasant here, and that unpleasantness, along with several other objects, is placed very firmly in the foreground, which gives a nicely heightened feeling of space, so a good shot, and one of the film's better ones, I think. And they use stairs quite effectively a few times, like he's going down them here into somewhere we're pretty sure he's going to regret. And the depth in this shot does emphasise the dread of what he's being drawn towards, and the other way around, when desperately trying to get out of whatever's down there, I quite like this view where the foreground doorway sort of represents safety, and it maybe feels just that little bit too far for him to get to, with the 3D really helping there. I do wish it had been a stronger piece of 3D, but the effect does still heighten the tension in this scene. And it's useful in this shot too, when she's running down the corridor, and again it feels like it could have benefited from being a bit stronger, but the 3D sense of space and distance still helps to make the shot work. Although another time they use the stairway shot where the lights aren't on, so the walls closest to us are in darkness, and they seem to be playing it rather safely with their lens separation, which I think means that any sense of three-dimensional space drops off after not too many feet, so this view doesn't really make too much of the format. Before the opening credits, there's a sequence that compiles several moments from the 1974 film, which was obviously a 2D film, and they've been post-converted into 3D. Some of this is nicely effective, like when someone bursts through a window, or these moody shafts of light. This is really quite nice, and I like the way the obviously scary-looking antler room beyond the doorway sits in its own sinister 3D space, where the 3D is suggesting the danger beyond. Not all of the shots are properly converted, like some of them are basically flat with just some smoky effect at the side put into 3D space, but I think the best of them, if this is a shot from 1974, it's been about 40 years since I watched it, but I love the reflection that's been put nicely inside the eyeball here. It's very effective and really successful. And there's another reflection shot where she's realising something about the person in the portrait, and the 3D obviously positions her in a space behind the picture, and it makes the shot work much better than it does in 2D, so this feels like genuine 3D storytelling. I mean, the 3D isn't exactly strong or exciting here, but it is a nice effect. And there's a good sequence in a storm where the rain feels like it's filling some solid 3D space, and there's a few top-down shots where the 3D works well, like here with the set's lines of perspective, working with the 3D to help elevate the feeling of unease. But when I said at the top that you might expect plenty of bold 3D in a film like this, unfortunately I don't think it ever really pushes it to the degree where you get anything like a thrill from the 3D, and all too often it can feel just a little bit too restrained for my liking. Like with the camera pulling back here, there's very little stereo space either defining the interior or separating it from the exterior. And with these cars, there's almost nothing to tell you you're watching in 3D. This looks like a long lens coupled with a small interaxial, and the result is virtually 2D. And most of the faces in close-up look quite flat, and that's something that the better post-converted films seem to manage to make look a lot more sculpted than this natively shot one does. And I think the most three-dimensional close-up of anyone's face is the man himself, when we get to see Leatherface doing some nice auto-cosmetic surgery, and you can actually feel some depth to the skin, and there's a tangible shape to his head. I do find it slightly odd that for a film that's very happy to show somebody being literally chainsawed in half, and there is some blood thrown a small way out of the screen here, how they don't mind showing something like this, but they appear to be disinclined to ramp the 3D up to the kind of levels that I think a film like this is crying out for. You only have to have seen a small handful of 3D movies to have seen dozens of examples of the gun pointing out of the screenshot done better than they are in this one. And one of cinema's great trick shots is the zoom dolly, where the camera moves towards or back from the subject, and the zoom keeps them the same size in the frame so that the background's either rushing towards them or dropping away. And when these are done well in 3D, they can look spectacular, but I think maybe this is one of the less impressive ones that I've seen. Some shots do look like they were set up to give a feeling of 3D space, like the meat counter here, and a similarly framed shot of the tabletop here. This does look like there was thought given to 3D framing, and there are several shots from behind these banisters, similar to the view behind gates, which are fairly standard 3D views, and they do work in a fairly simple kind of way. The same where the camera tracks along the fence here. It's one of those 3D moments that feels like just two separate layers, and it works, but mainly by appearing as one flat layer on top of another flat layer. Although I admit it does help a little bit with the sense of doom as they're about to enter into the grounds of the House of Horrors. There are quite a few structures and locations where it looks like the production design was thinking in three-dimensional space. A very basic example is this A-frame, although the way it's shot, there's only quite a small amount of separation to the vehicle beyond it, and the webbing above him here does make for a potentially nice three-dimensional canopy, and it's there from a story point of view to offer a sense of protection to another character, but that just doesn't feel quite as much of a 3D effect on show as I'd expect. A Ferris wheel ought to look really good with all sorts of opportunities for nice 3D views, but again, I just wish the 3D was that little bit more potent when they've gone to the trouble of choosing such a three-dimensional structure. This place is a fabulous location for great 3D, with its hooks hanging down all over the place, all those draped chains and pillars and pipes and whatnot, and it looks okay, but as before, it does look to me like it was begging to be dialed up a notch or two rather than shot in the way most of the film was, which is that the 3D appears mostly quite natural, and in this context I don't really mean that as a compliment. There's some nice thought for 3D design with these bones dangling from the ceiling, and it does work, but imagine if they'd been strung up all along the length of the corridor. It could have made for a stunning 3D view, and to me anyway, this sort of sums up the film's maybe not fully committed approach to using 3D, and really not getting overly adventurous with it. In what I thought was one of the film's better moments, they subvert that movie trope of the car smashing through the gates. Whilst it's actually quite a funny scene, from a 3D point of view it robs us of a potentially fun 3D shot of the vehicle bursting out. If you've ever had a go at 3D photography, I'm sure early on in your experiments you'll have realised that if you point your camera down the length of a bridge, it'll offer up a superb 3D view, and I'm sure you'll have captured a far better one than what we get here, with the almost total lack of depth in this shot being very surprising. It even looks a little bit like they've applied some post-converted 3D just around the van. It's a very strange shot. Speaking of 3D photography, I like this guy here with his very obviously single lens 2D camera, who manages to take several 3D photographs. And there's this unfortunate armadillo, a direct reference to the shot from the original film, and I suspect even several days after this, when the poor bugger's been smushed by several dozen 18-wheelers, he won't look all that much flatter than he does in this oddly shallow view. Now, I suppose it could be argued that they kept the 3D mild most of the time, so that when they kicked it in, it would be all the more powerful, but I've got two problems with that reasoning, one of which is that whilst that might be a legitimate technique to reduce the depth briefly to hit you with a moment of powerful powerful 3D. I think that's only really a valid trick when you do it briefly in a few sequences here and there, but my second reason not to go with that argument is they never do hit you with a strong 3D moment anyway. It could be that I'm downplaying the quality of the 3D a bit too much, but there were quite a few times when I found it particularly disappointing. Like, we know there's a dark secret waiting for her in this box, and so I think it really should have been placed in powerful 3D space to ramp up its importance and moment of revelation, but there's so little effort to isolate it here, and it's another one of the film's shots that makes me feel like they weren't really fully on board with the fact that they were making a 3D film, more that they were making a regular film that they happened to be shooting with the 3D camera. Another scene I thought was really disappointing was the burning house, where the remains of its frame could have looked sensational in good 3D, but we only ever see it looking flat in these long shots. Some of the interior flames have some depth and separation to them, but these shots feel like a real wasted opportunity to me. The moment that I thought was probably the most underwhelming was in this scene, where someone's clinging on to avoid going into the grinder. It looks to me like there really ought to be a lot of depth to this shot, but it's another one that feels undercranked. I don't want to spoil it by saying whether he goes in, but of course he does, and in the moment you might expect a load of chunks of flesh and bones and blood to get spat out of the thing towards you. It's the dampest squib of all, with virtually nothing going on in 3D space. So just an extremely quick word about the film itself. I suppose it's a sort of competently made, and none of the acting's really objectionable. There is a story that unfolds and progresses, even if it's not exactly a plausible one. It goes by quick enough not to be boring. It's a lot more gory than the original film, but at the same time it's far less scary too. Placing itself as a direct sequel to the classic 74 film, which had that incredibly powerful, grainy and oppressive feel, was always going to be a thankless task, especially with the clean digital look of a modern movie. I certainly didn't hate it, but in the end it's one of those films that I probably wouldn't watch more than once if it wasn't for the 3D, and even then watching it twice might be more than enough for me. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for a look at another 3D Blu-ray. Until then, thanks for looking on this one, cheers for now, bye bye.